Now then, why did we go for a concealed cistern and an off the floor toilet? Well, basically this is our ensuite and this is our toilet. So we have a concealed cistern with an off the floor toilet, and it's something me and my wife both really like. But there are pros and cons for having a concealed cistern. Now let's have a look at the pros first. So for us, it was about boxing the pipes in and you didn't see them. So I got a box in the soil pipe and I got a box in the central heating pipes, what feed through for the spare bedroom, the hallway and the bathroom itself. And I didn't want little bits of boxing in. So for me, that was the main reason why we wanted a concealed cistern, because I could build a box all the way around. Also, they look great. That's a good pro because they look really good. And another good pro is they're quite hygienic, or they're more hygienic than the standard toilet. Cons for them are, one is they're a lot more expensive because there's a lot more work goes into building them. Another con is this is where you have to do any repairs through here. So if you want to replace your toilet siphon, if you want to replace your float valve or your float operated valve, it has to be done through this little gap here. So that's a big con for them. Now this toilet clicks when you sit on it. I don't know if you can hear it, which winds me up. And hopefully when I install our toilet, it doesn't click when you get on and off it. It's basically the pressure being put down from the pan onto the tiles. So hopefully I'm going to stop that. So that's basically the main reasons why we went for a concealed cistern. So I can box the pipes in and it looks good. Well, I think it looks good anyway. What do you think of concealed cisterns? Do you like them or do you not like them? Put in the comments down below and tell me if you do or you don't. Now the first job is to install the frame to the wall and to the floor, following the manufacturer's instructions. So that's the frame in place. I've just got to level it up a little bit. Other than that, I'll show you what we've done. Now you can see the frame's in place now. So basically it's held against the wall with these two bolts at the back here. And also, this is where the toilet fixes onto through these two bolts here, which then go through to the wall and fix in the wall. Now you've two different sizes, which are 180 and 230. So you need to measure your toilet to see what you've got, and we've got a 180 one. Also, there's two bolt holes down here at the bottom where I will be bolting it through the wood and into the floor. So there's some bungs what come here and here to stop the smells and getting dirt in. And then there's a plate what goes on here, which I've got to put on in a minute, which sticks through so you can put your plasterboard and or your board on it. I'm going to put ply on the front of this to give it some more strength. So when your toilet fixes on, it's just held on with these two bolts, and it's the force, downward force. So you're going to have some force to bend that and bend the toilet. So you've got to make sure, you can't really put it on plasterboard, you need to put it on ply. Now one of the key measurements is this meter mark here. So it needs to be a meter from that mark there down to the finished floor level. That's our finished floor level where the wood is. So that's how you set your height for your toilet, so you're not too high or too low when you come to sit on it. So that's the actual frame in place. All I've got to do now is stud all this out here now to make the boxing in. So even though this is the first piece of wood I'm actually fixing to the wall, what I had to do first was get a piece of wood on top of the frame and level across to the back wall for this piece of wood. So even though this is the first piece I'm installing, I did quite a bit of measuring first before I actually got to this stage. I also had to work out where this side of the bath was going to go. because that would determine how actual long this boxing in was going to be. Now that's my first piece in, levelled and straight. So this piece I'm putting in now is just going to be holding up plasterboard, and I didn't need to go all the way down to the floor with this one, just down to the soil pipe. So what I'm doing here is just making sure this piece is straight so I can get the right height for this piece of wood. This little noggin here is just to give extra strength to the piece of wood which is securing everything on this corner. And this piece of wood is just actually securing the two pieces of wood together. So the one that's secured to the wall is going to secure the one at the front. And again, it's massively important that this wood is all straight and plumb, because otherwise you're going to get a wonky toilet. The cupboard, or the boxing in, is virtually done. Just need to get some ply from the front. So I'm going to put a piece of ply over the front and then put another piece of ply on to pretend it's the tiles so I can kind of put the toilet on. Now it's time to get the water connection connected. So let's get on with that then. Now the first task I need to do is cut a notch out here in the top of the wood, because the wood is stopping the tap connector getting onto the connection for the float valve, because it's actually at the top here. So I'm using my multi-tool now just to cut out a notch. Now my notch is complete, I should be able to get my bent tap connector onto this isolation valve which feeds the float operated valve. Now the cold feed is done to the toilet. All we're going to do now is turn it on and test it don't leak. Now it's time to get this OSB board ready for going on the front of the boxing in. Now I didn't use ply in the end because it was just far too expensive, so I thought I would try the OSB board to see if it worked just as good. I could have actually used weddy board as well, but I decided to go for this. So I'm preparing the holes now. For this one I'm doing is the flush pipe. I've just done the two holes for the bolts where they go through, and then I've got the biggest one where the pan connector comes through to do yet, which I'm doing now. So I'm putting a big hole through, and then I will use my jigsaw to cut the rest of the hole out. Now another reason for me using the OSB board instead of marine ply is, well, they say OSB is actually twice as strong as marine ply, but obviously it's not as waterproof as marine ply. Once I've tiled on top of it, hopefully it's strong enough so this toilet doesn't squeak. This next one I'm cutting out is the access into the flush valve or the float valve. So hopefully when I put this board over the top, it's in the right place. If not, it might need a few tweaks. So basically I've cut out 4 holes into the corners, and now I'm just using my jigsaw to cut along the lines to cut out this rectangle. And a little tip for you, when you're using a jigsaw, always wait for the blade to stop before you actually pull out the blade. Now the OSB is attached to the boxing in and the holes are cut in both pieces of wood, I can now start looking at fixing this toilet temporary. Remember, I've put another piece of OSB on front of the back piece to act as a temporary tile, just to give me the thickness of cutting the pipes, so I don't have to cut the pipes twice. Now the first pipe I'm going to cut is the flush pipe. So the first measurement I need is this one, where the wood and the flush pipe actually meet each other. So I've got a flat surface here, so I'm using my saw, I've got my Sharpie pen, and I'm just going to mark where the wall and the pipe meet. Now I've placed the flush pipe onto the toilet and I'm doing exactly the same thing again, make my second mark. Now you can see the difference between the two marks is 75mm. So what I need to do now is cut 75mm off this right hand side end. Not the left end, because that's where the rubber grommet goes for going into the pan. And that'd mess me up if I cut that side. So to make it easier for me to cut it, the first thing I did was use some tape around the marks so I could see quite easily where the marks were. And then I've placed the flush pipe into the pan so it will hold it at one end for me, and I can just use my wood saw now to cut straight through the plastic. Some guys will probably use plastic pipe cutters for this, but I wanted to show you this way in case you haven't got plastic pipe cutters. And then I have to do exactly the same process again with the toilet pan flush pipe. This time I need to cut 40mm off this pipe. And again I've connected the pan connector to the actual pan to make it easier for me to cut it. And because this plastic pipe is going into a rubber seal, we've got to make sure we file it really well on the outside of the pipe, but also make sure you file it on the inside, because you don't want any toilet paper sticking to the inside of the pan and blocking the toilet. And now what's left to do now is lube up the actual connector and push the pipe on, which is easier said than done. Now these are the clips that the manufacturer sent me for getting the pan connector to go onto the actual frame, and you use this grub screw here to fasten the pan onto the actual screwed rod. Now to put these clips on the pan, the first thing I need to do is slide it through here and line up the grub screw with this hole here, because this is where we're going to put the Allen key in to tighten up the grub screw. Once I've got that in line, I can then use this plastic screw, or the second part of this clip, to hold it onto the pan. So you just basically screw these two parts in together. There's a male and female part. Then you need to use a little key to tighten it up. So again, use the Allen key to get it in the right position and hold it in the right position, and then you use this little plastic key what comes in the kit to be able to tighten up this male part of the connector. Now don't do it too tight, but it has to be tight enough so it doesn't move. If you do it too tight, you end up stripping the thread. I wonder why I know that. Next thing is cutting the screwed rod down to the right length. So you can see here when I've screwed on these clips, I've got just under 2 inches, around about 50 mil, it's about 48 mil I think, of screwed rod left, so I need to cut off that length off each piece of screwed rod. Now what I've done here first is screw a nut all the way down to the end, or the closest bit to the OSB board, before I started cutting off the screwed rod, and that is going to help me then to be able to keep the thread clean and clear, so when I come to screw these metal brackets on. You'll see what I mean in a minute when I actually do get through this screwed rod. And to make this work properly, you have to cut right the way through the rod. You don't try and snap the last bit off, because it puts a lip onto the thread and stops you screwing any nuts on. So all I need to do now is unscrew this nut, and it should give me a nice clean thread to be able to screw on this bracket without having to file it. Let's see if it works. And as you can see, it slips on incredibly easy, and I just need to screw this all the way down to the OSB. And then it's just a matter of doing exactly the same thing on the other side. And finally, it's time to get this pan onto the bolts and the connectors and the brackets. So line it up and push it on, making sure you've sprayed everything with silicone grease first to make it a lot easier to get it on. Finally, it's time for testing. So inside here is an isolation valve for the float valve. So I'm just turning this on now and letting the system fill up. Now I've actually left the left hand side of this boxing in open, so when I do flush the toilet, I'll be able to check the pan connector and the flush pipe aren't leaking, and I'll also be able to check that the actual soil pipe where I've connected it on with the socket isn't leaking. So here you can see the float valve on the right hand side where the flexi pipe's connected to. There's the isolation valve, and this red thing is the flush buttons. So the white and blue buttons are the full flush or the half flush, depending if you're doing a number 1 or a number 2. And now it's full, it's time to flush and test. So now it's a few weeks later, all the tiling's complete, so all I've got to do now is install this toilet permanently. So first job is to put the pan back in. Now this should fit perfectly because the actual tiles ended up the same thickness as the OSB board. So I've not even had to cut any of the pipes down. And with a bit of lubrication, it's just slipped on and fits like a glove. So just putting my level underneath now to keep it in place while I tighten up the grub screws inside the toilet. Let's just check and make sure it's level first, which it is. And now I can use the Allen key to tighten up these grub screws to hold the toilet onto the frame. So that's the toilet. Pan installed, everything's tight, everything's level, just needs silicone. Now it's time to install the toilet seat. The seat is a quick release seat with a soft close. First thing I need to put in is these, they're like raw plugs really, which are going to hold the seat into the pan because you can't get any bolts underneath. Then I need to put these two brackets in, which are just basically held on with a bolt. So it has a flat or a Phillips head. I'm just using a Phillips head screwdriver to screw the bolt into the plug, which should just be like a raw plug in a plasterboard wall and expand and hold the bracket in. Now when you're first putting these brackets in, it's kind of guesswork which way they go in, because the toilet seat is designed to fit multiple pans. Now I can fit the actual seat onto the brackets after I've unpacked it out of the plastic. And you'll see there's just two holes which line up and push into the pegs from the brackets holding the seat to the pan. And now you can see the seat needs to come slightly forward, so I'll have to adjust the brackets. Now to remove the seat, you just press in this lever at the back and it comes off the pegs. And we've got a bit of a watcher. She's always watching. So now I've adjusted the pegs to where I think it needs to go, just tightening them up again, but tightening them up pretty firmly now because I think they're in the right location. Again, it's just a matter of trial and error and messing around with them. So now I just need to put the decorative caps over the top to hide the screws and the brackets. And then it's just slide the toilet seat back on and test it's in the right location. And now you'll see it is a soft closed toilet seat, which takes forever, but there you go. And the job's done. Now it's time to install the flushing mechanism. Now the first thing I need to do is actually cut this plastic back now, which took an absolute age. Some of these I've done, they just snap off dead easy, but for some reason, even with new Stanley blades, this was hard to cut through and hard to snap off. But after 5 minutes of messing around, I actually got it to the right depth we require, which is flush with the tile face. Now it's time to install the flushing mechanism and the push button plate. First thing I need to do is install this guide plate. You can see this guide plate also gives you instructions on how to take the flushing mechanism out and the fill valve. Next we need to put this bracket on, which actually holds on the flush plate and everything goes through this. So these are just securing pegs, which on this right hand side it turns to the right, and on the left hand side once we put it through we turn it to the left. So these two plastic clips now lock this plate into position, and then we just need to move these two red tabs to lock those into position as also, so it doesn't move. Then we need to put these flush valve extender pieces in. So what these do is they push through into the flushing mechanism, twist and lock, and these are what actually operates the mechanism when you push the button. So the push button on the plate pushes against these, which then lifts up the flushing mechanism, so it allows the toilet to do the short flush or the long flush. And then it's just a matter of pushing the flush plate into position and locking it in, and the job is done. So that's my look on how to install this RAK concealed cistern with an off the floor toilet. So hopefully you've liked the video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!